Good afternoon. Good afternoon. God bless. Go straight into it. So a couple of days ago, this is the 6th of April 2023. A couple of days ago, Donald Trump was indicted, and the whole world, at least it seemed like it from our UK press point of view, the whole world was focused on it and watching very closely, and it was historic, and the first president to be indicted and all that. And then he was due to speak at his house in Mar-a-Lago later on that evening, and that was I chose to stay up to watch it. It was 1:15 the UK time, BST. And shortly after that, he spoke for 25 minutes. And this was the first time in more than 2 years that the mainstream media in the UK, and presumably elsewhere, definitely in the US, because on CNN, Sky News, and the BBC, this was broadcast, the entire speech. I don't believe at any point in over the last 2 years have they allowed the voice of the trumpets, I use that term, the voice of the trumpets, it'll become clear later, have they allowed that to be heard by everybody? They've just taken bits and then spoken about what he said in the way they wanted to. They've censored it, etc. But to let him speak and have a voice, recently he was restored back onto Facebook, etc. That was interesting. And anyway, after the speech, it was now time to go to bed, because now you're looking at getting on for 2 o'clock. However, I just sensed in my spirit that the Lord was going to speak to me. The Lord is about to speak to me. And there's a certain feeling that sometimes one gets when the Lord is about to give one a word. So I just got quiet, and basically God said to me some things. The first thing he said, the main thing he emphasized was that Donald Trump's words. Firstly, I saw Donald Trump. I saw him as a weighty person. That he, spiritually, there is a weight about him, heavy duty, not a lightweight. And then I saw a sword coming out of his mouth, which a sword comes out of everybody's mouth, because a sword comes out of the mouth of the Lord, and that's his word. And all human beings are made in his image and likeness. The main thing that separates us from the animals is the sword that comes out of our mouth, our ability to speak. So I saw a sword coming out of his mouth, a big sword, and it was to do with weight. And that his voice, his words carry weight. His voice carries weight. And for a politician, if you're going to carry weight, your words better carry that weight, because that's the main thing in politics. And what I did was write down basically what the Lord showed me, as I always do. And I think I'll read it word for word, because what it does is, in this case, it's quite, it gets it across. So this was timed at 2:15 on the 5th of April, 2:15 a.m. On the 5th of April this year, and I just wrote it out as I do. So his words carry weight. I saw Trump being spiritually heavy, carrying weight. A long sword that Trump was walking on. It was as if this sword was extending out, and it was to do with his voice, but he was kind of walking on top of it. And then I've put a forklift truck carrying weight. Trump's words carry weight. A forklift truck carries weight, albeit in a different style. And then I've put, because this happened as well on that day in the office, in my office-based job, we share a building with people who have a different angle of the industry, and they often use forklift trucks to carry heavy weights on and off lorries. And because they were all absent and they'd been called away, I was the only person in the office who, at times of when there's just not enough bodies around, I'm one extra person that they've trained, if you like, to be able to use this in an emergency. And so today I operated, I've only used this about 2 or 3 times in a couple of years, but today I operated a much greater forklift truck at work, helping out the other guys in the building with whom we share the building. The one from before that I used to operate, I operated a much greater forklift truck at work than the one from before, and was operating it for the first time. Just as Trump, for the first time in over 2 years, they've allowed Trump's voice on the mainstream media. It was interesting how this was a heavier forklift truck than the previous one, and you have the forks that come out, and I compare it with the sight of his voice and him walking on top of that sword. So a sword is not really something which would be strong enough to anchor a person walking on top. If it's just held, the sword would go down if someone walked across it. But because this stayed up, it was operating like the fork of a forklift truck. So he's saying his voice is carrying a lot of weight, carrying more weight than before, just as the forklift was carrying more weight, or it was a heavier duty one than the one I'd used before. So for the first time in over 2 years, they have allowed Trump to have a voice on the mainstream media and let him speak and give an entire speech. They have miscalculated badly, because God has spiritually applied so much weight to this man's voice. The more people hear him speak, the more they will be impacted and impressed and the more votes he will get, because God has given him a mouth. Now, open brackets from Luke 21 verse 15 in the ESV, open brackets, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. I'm reminded of the words I opened in the NIV Bible at random in the aftermath of the midterm elections in November 2022. I opened the Bible at random and it said, "Listen to the sound of the trumpet," from Jeremiah 17. So this is a word that God gave me at the time of the midterm elections, a few days afterwards, and people were saying that maybe Donald Trump is finished. He's responsible for the whole thing not working. They hardly made any impact compared to what they were expecting. It was a great result for the Democrats. But God opened this up to me. He said, "Listen to the sound of the trumpet." And this is definitely almost like there's a call for the people to listen, a spiritual call for the people to listen to his voice, to what he has to say, because God has put something on it. God has to use people. That's why in this world God had to bring Jesus. He had to become a human being in order to be effective in this world in the way he was, because there's a divinely ordained protocol that on earth man has dominion. Psalm 115 verse 16 says that the heavens even the heaven of heavens belong to the Lord, but the earth he has given to the children of men. So ownership of the earth is retained by God, according to Psalm 24 verse 1. The earth is the Lord and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants, but rulership, let them have dominion, is given to man. So when you want to operate in authority, whether you're the devil wanting to do things in this earth, you raise up witches, you raise up warlocks, you raise up occultic people to raise up altars, and then to give spirits permission to put weight on their words, that they can, through those people, exercise authority in this world, because spirits are subject to divine protocol from Genesis chapter 1. Let man have dominion. So again, I've just repeated, the sword was suspended and anchored at one end like the fork of a forklift, but maybe possibly, and this was a little bit aspect, a small aspect which wasn't as clear, but I just saw it a bit, possibly like a river enabling him, Trump, to pass over what would have been impassable waters that they have miscalculated or calculated that Trump will never be able to advance beyond. They think they've got enough in place to grind him to a halt. But the more he talks and is heard, the more he advances. His enemies have done everything in their power to stop Trump in his tracks and grind him to a halt. But all he has to do is talk. And the mainstream media believe they can afford to let him talk on their platform. They can now afford to. They've either become too confident or too complacent, or a combination of the two. God has outmaneuvered them and will frustrate their expectations. Then I remembered how when Peter was supernaturally released from prison in Acts chapter 12, evil expectations of the wicked against God's people, and people who are advancing God's purpose and God's plans. When Peter was supernaturally released from prison, in Acts 12, the text in verse 11 said the following: "And when Peter had come to himself, he said, 'Now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all the expectation of the Jewish people.'" So that's what came through. This is a person of weight. How can that be practical? Well, it needs to be in his mouth. God has given him a weighty mouth, weighty words, and he catches the crafty in their craftiness. The pit they dig, they fall into it. Had they known, they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. It's a tactic God often uses, and I think he's drawing it all out, bringing everyone's attention to this. They're even talking about part of the indictment, a big part, significant part of the indictment, is about messing about with the 2016 election. In the last several months, there was a big attack, if you like, by the authorities, or a big move by the authorities on Trump in respect of classified documents. And then the other side, Joe Biden, was found to have a lot of classified documents in a lot more places. Not as much, but certainly more places. And then it became a head scratcher as to what they would do about it, because they'd made all this noise about Donald Trump, and now their side had the same problem but on a bigger scale. Now that it seems to me, honestly, I'm not saying this is God, but it just looks as though they're being drawn into confidently going after him in terms of this 2016 election and even the other one, and everyone's been made to watch it, and it's been such a hoo-ha. It's the first time former president has been indicted, and the main issue is around election and trying to steal an election or mess up an election. And then God will just, I believe he will just lift the lid on you know what, and a far more serious situation, again, that the other side is guilty of, will come to light, and it might just feel under a lot of pressure to take serious action against the current administration, against people in the current administration, and they're what would be accomplices in that context. So that's just it looks as though that's what's shaping, to me, that's what's shaping up to happen. But as per the last couple of days, what I believe God said to me was, He's tricked them. His voice carries a lot of weight. God has put a lot of weight on the man's mouth, and unfortunately, they are allowing that weight and that mouth to be released into the airwaves and into lots of people's ears, and that's just going to help him more and more and more, and backfire in terms of votes, popularity, etc. So God bless. Thank you for listening.